une brosse.
This child is learning to read. He's trying to rewire areas in his brain so it can turn shapes of letters on paper into sounds and words of spoken language. Actually, his teacher might not always be helping him because one common way of teaching probably just makes it harder to learn to read. Stanislas Dehaene knows this. He won the Brain Prize in 2014. He studies how reading takes place in the brain. He is a professor at Collège de France and the leader of INSERM CEA's Cognitive Neuroimaging Center in Saclay, south of Paris. These laboratories are called neurospin.
In my lab, we are specializing in analyzing the functions of the human brain, and especially the higher level functions such as reading, language, mathematics, number processing, consciousness.
Watching the brain at work requires finely tuned precision scanning instruments, as well as very carefully designed experiments if you want to make sure you're actually studying a certain function of the brain. This means the scientists in Dehaene's laboratory, in order to see how the brain reads, might construct a whole hierarchy of stimuli, ranging from real words all the way down to pseudo words, or even pseudo letters that look like letters but are meaningless symbols in any alphabet.
In this way, we can isolate some of the brain processes by subtraction. We ask, what difference does it make if it's a word? What difference does it make if it's pronounceable? Where in the brain is a specific process going on?
So what actually happens in the brain when it reads? And what implications should it have for how reading should be taught? It turns out our brains build on the circuits we trained when we absorbed spoken language. In other words, to grasp the alphabet, the brain first must learn to speak. That is easy for a child. Over millions of years, evolution has hardwired the human brain structures for that purpose. We don't need to go to school to learn to speak. All we need is to experience a language. But evolution has never shaped the brain to read. No brain structures have been developed through evolution to make sense of letters and written words.
We were never born in order to learn to read. It's an invention, it's very recent. What we do is we recycle some of the circuits of the ventral visual cortex. Some of these circuits are specialized for faces, for instance, but we turn them into circuits for recognizing letters and bringing this information about letters to the same exact circuit that is being used for spoken language. They know about the pronunciation of the word. And especially when you're a beginner reader, the challenge of reading is to turn the letters into sounds.
So that's what this child's brain is struggling with, turning symbols on paper into sounds. Sounds that make sense because they are part of spoken language. But until he masters this conversion, he cannot focus on the meaning of the word.
Now, as you become an expert reader, you become faster and faster in doing this conversion. You begin to be able to do it for an entire set of letters all at once, in parallel. So you no longer have the feeling that you're doing this slow conversion, but it's still going on in your head.
These are findings that have implications for teaching all over the world, because many children are trained to recognize whole words when they learn to read. That might not help the child at all.
Well, there is a debate in the education literature about how to teach reading. There is this idea that maybe you just need to expose children to whole words or even whole sentences, and they will absorb the reading system. We know it's not the case, and we know now that it's the other way, the explicit teaching of correspondences between graphemes and phonemes, between letters and sounds, which is the right way to teach reading, because this is the way to teach explicitly those circuits going directly from vision to spoken language. This is the preferred route for the brain. If you don't do that, if you draw attention to the whole word, there are experiments showing that you are teaching another circuit, much more in the right hemisphere, which is, you know, the opposite side of the brain.
then you're not training the brain to read. The discovery of how the brain learns to read is an example of how scientific measurements of the brain can lead to better understanding of psychological processes like reading, mathematics, and other functions of consciousness. And it turns out, even mathematics can be taught in ways the brain finds more or less natural. This was clear to Stanislas Dehaene decades ago.
So in the case of mathematics, we've also found that there is another area of the brain, I can show you, it's exactly here in the interparietal sulcus, that exists for a long time in evolution, exist in a monkey, and are caring about number and space and time, and they give us a sort of foundation for the concepts of mathematics. I think there are some implications of what we found in mathematics for education. It should not be taught in the abstract, but it should reconnect to those basic intuitions that we find in young children, in babies, and even in non-human primates.
More than 100 years ago, the Eiffel Tower was erected in Paris as a celebration of the wonders of natural science, engineering, and the era of industry. Today, we live at the brim of another important era, the era of the brain. In the next century, finer and finer instruments might allow neuroscientists to uncover how the brain works, not only reading or other relatively simple functions, but also how our sense of awareness arises from the chemistry and electrical signals deep in our brains.
My hope is that we'll soon have a theory for how to bridge the neural level to the psychological level. Right now we have a huge separation between psychological studies on the one hand and neuroscience studies. And my goal in life is really to bring these two together, create all of the bridges and the theories, the mathematics also, that will allow us to understand how groups of neurons, just flesh, is able to create thought, mental images. That is really the challenge of our field.